Okay, so a good evening or good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Flow Driven CEO, the Bee Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast. Really didn't get that right. I have a very special guest all the way from Mumbai in India. Devangana. Oh gosh, I just pronounced that wrong, didn't I?
No, you did. You got it. You got it right.
Did I get
That's
it
perfect.
right?
hmm
And I didn't get your surname. For some reason, I haven't got it written
That's
in my.
Devangana Mishra.
That's right,
Yeah,
Devangana Mishra,
right.
the founder and CEO of a Brain Bristle, which is a pioneering foundation that is dedicated to creating inclusivity for children and adolescents on the autism spectrum, particularly in low income schools. What
hmm
a beautiful person you are in terms of, founding and the CEO of such an incredible name as well, Brain Bristle.
Right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Besides running my foundation, I'm also a writer. I'm an artist. And that kind of like you know how writing and art is such a dynamic space that if you don't keep creating, it kind of like sometimes gives you a sense of like stagnation or
Yeah.
anxiety. So I think that's what got me into the field of autism back in 2007 or 8. And it's been a really long time in the field. I moved to India in 2019, and I was in the leadership team of another big nonprofit organization when I started to see the low income schools of India. And I'd been away from the country for a good 10, 11 years. And when I started to see the low income schools of India and the autistic kids there, I was just like, oh my God, nobody's doing anything about it. There were these autistic kids just unserviced. No one was providing them any support, and they were in our city's classrooms. So that's kind of what triggered the idea of Brain Bristle, because I'd worked with some high income organizations where autistic kids had a paraphernalia of support. There was a special
Mm,
educator, there was a shadow teacher, there was a counselor, there was
mm.
differentiation. None of that was, of course, in our low income schools. So that kind of gave me the idea of starting Brain Bristle, and we've been around for about 2.5 years now, even though I've been in the field of autism for really long. But over the last 2 years, we've been able to take over a few Mumbai low income schools
Wow.
where we work with the autistic population there, educating them, including them in meal times and play times and classroom lectures and things. And we also do a lot of advocacy building. Like Brain Bristle runs its own podcast with people in the space of autism.
I love that.
Um, yeah, so we do a lot of other work, but our ground intense work is just building inclusivity in our low income schools for autistic kids.
And where did you? I've got a couple of questions. I've got lots of questions
Uh-huh.
actually, but how did Brain Bristle, the actual name, come about? Like, you don't hear bristle very often. I love
Right.
that word, but how did you come about with Brain Bristle?
I know. I think it was a bit of a reaction at that time when I started the organization. But I saw these autistic kids in low income schools or even middle income schools, and if they could do a math problem, they were just sitting and matching colors. If they could do something more academically or socially or theatrically more advanced, they were just doing this much because they were on the spectrum of autism and no one wanted to put that extra effort. And
Interesting.
I think Brain Bristle was just like, how you toothbrush your teeth every morning, you just don't leave them like that. So it's like, how do we use our brain to its maximal
Oh, I
to
love
get
that.
our kids, and how do these kids use their brains to their best to, actually catapult beyond a certain level of, this is it, this is all I can do. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You're so lit up, Devangana. Like in terms of just like you look like you are just brimming with joy and so
Yeah.
purposeful in what you're doing.
hmm
In terms of with your leadership and with Brain Bristle, you use the arts, the media, sports, and education
Right.
that catalyst. Tell me a little bit
hmm
about that because you also mentioned that from the arts and the creative background. Was that
Right.
part of you influencing that into the business as well, like to give these children and adolescents more, kind of, I guess, variety and education and learning?
Right. So I think it was a mix of. I've advised and worked with a lot of organizations where some autistic kids were mathematically and musically really good. Some were really good at like writing fan fiction and uh, going into these deep holes of their fantasy world. Some were really good at just advocating for our rights, autism rights. Some were just like excellent performers. So I think if one thing doesn't work with a child on the spectrum of autism, my idea was something else will. And if this doesn't, something else will. So if not arts, maybe poetry. If not poetry, maybe theater. Maybe if not theater, maybe English literature. So if it's maybe politics, right? So how do we try different fields of education to actually find a pathway for a child on the spectrum?
I love that. So it's almost like you're creating all these new models for learning
Right,
and belonging and
right,
societal evolution,
right,
and that
right,
everyone deserves a chance.
right.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
where were you for or 12 years or so when you weren't living in India? Where were you living?
I was so I went to study autism at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York.
Mm,
So I was there for about 2.5 years when I worked there while I was studying there. And then I came back to India for a brief bit before I left for Indonesia, where I spent 4 years at a big international school there. We worked on creating mindfulness curriculums, just really like taking autistic kids and just like exposing them to everything we could so they could find what they're interested in. And we just saw a lot of success. And then I moved to Hong Kong to be an advisor. I used to create curriculum for a high school, teach there, so do everything there. And after that, I was there for a couple of years, and then I moved to India to be work and the leadership team of a nonprofit here, which led me to starting my own independent work.
Brain Bristle. And what was it? What was the catalyst for you starting your own business, your own not-for-profit?
I think at it takes a while to get that confidence in a field that you're just like, okay, I am ready to take things off on my own. It's almost like living at your parents' house till you're of a certain age, and then you're like, all right, now I'm ready to be independent. So I think I felt like I'd had 10, 12 years of really good experience under some excellent organizations and educational institutions. So that courage kind of, you reach a point where you're like, all right, this is it. I'm ready to take off. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, I'll be honest, the first 2, 3 years were really hard because you're trying to figure out policies and manpower and hiring and how do you scale and what's the best way to scale. So there
Mm,
was a lot of figuring things out, which usually when you walk into an organization, it's all figured out for you.
yeah.
But we're in a good place now.
Yeah. And how big's your team? How big's your team that works for you?
So because I do two things simultaneously, I'm also a fiction writer, I'm an artist. So I've got a team of 2 or 3 who manage me and my life in the arts. And then I've got Brain Bristle, and we've got about 7, 8 people right now. And I'm just in the middle of interviews to get at least like 7, 8 more people to work with schools. So we'll be a really large team this
Yeah.
year.
So you've got the best of both worlds, right? Because
I
you're
do, I do, I
creative
do.
in the arts, but then you're
Yeah,
working with, children and adolescents who are,
totally.
all about like that playing and that creativity. Do you
Hmm.
do you ever find that it gets a bit like do you ever find that you get stuck or blocked in terms of accessing your own creativity, or do you feel like because you've got the best of both worlds, you never have the blocks?
I think so. I think the moment I feel like I'm done with this project and I cannot put any more thought into this, I switch back to my nonprofit. And when I'm sick, like I'm just like I cannot talk about another crying kid. I switch back to my glamorous world of the arts. So I'm always like switching and giving as much to one field before I move on to the other.
And then
So
how
my
do you
my week's a good balance. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. But how do you manage your own cup? Like, how do you manage filling your own cup, given you're filling so many children's and adolescents' lives? Like, what do you do to ensure that you're, filling your own cup? Like you mentioned, you don't jump from one to the
So
other, but yeah.
yeah. So I think my life, my personal life in the arts is filling my own cup. I love writing and I love like, acting, or I love like wearing a brand's clothes and shooting for them. So that's kind of like filling my own vanity and my cup of self-indulgence. But when I'm working with Brain Bristle, it's like I don't exist. It's like thinking without a person. So we just like go all in working with kids.
Yeah, but you are thinking, aren't you, in terms of, well, you're doing it in a way that for me is almost like when you're working with the children or the kids, it's like you're
Yeah,
accessing this flow state where everything feels
right,
effortless.
right.
And you're constantly coming up with all these different new models and
Hmm. Hmm.
ideas.
Hmm.
I did ask a question when you signed up or booked in for the pod, and what was this one unique insight or experience in life, leadership, or business that you'd like to share? Um,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to kind of ask you a little bit about that because you talked around each time in life or in leadership, when I've stopped for growth, my team or
Hmm.
myself at a certain point, soon after I've realized there's a few more miles for me to go before I can pause. So that's
Right.
what I was probably asking you about maybe it wasn't the right question around filling your own cup, but can you please
Hmm.
elaborate a little bit more on what you were meaning by all of that?
So I think, I'm in my 30s. I just feel like when you feel like you've done X amount of work in any field, it could be like writing my second book and now working on my third book, or running my organization and scaling it to 8 people. I always feel like there's a little more need in our country. India is a developing country. The world of arts is so thriving in India. I'm just saying, if I've done this much, I can do a little more. And I know I can push myself to a little more. And I know I can make my team work a little harder, think a little harder, work a little deeper. So I think that keeps you feeling totally fulfilled. And I think like filling your own cup is almost like, if you can do this much, then do a little bit more. And then if you can do a little bit more, do a little bit more, because that's what kind of like just satiates your human hunger and stress and all of that.
Yeah, I love
So
that.
yeah,
Because it's like those one percenters, right? Like it's almost
right.
like what I talk to, and you probably talk to your team about it as well. And I
Yeah,
talk to my clients about it. It's like, what is that 1% or that one step you can take each day
right.
to take you further forward? And, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but like building those anti-fragile systems around you so that you're continuing to bounce forward and you're not
Uh-huh.
being stuck or staying in the one place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you find as on the opposite of that? What do you find as the biggest challenge slash opportunity when with leading a team?
I think getting everybody aligned in the same way in your values and your way of work and what you think is excellent work. I think like I mean, till the time I don't feel everything is as perfect as it can be. And it doesn't mean like perfect, but like as deeply intentionally thought as it can be. I'm not satisfied. So these days we're living in the chat GPT AI world, but like till the time I don't feel like personally this is my perfect best, I can't stop. But I feel like sometimes when you're managing a team, their best might not be,
Your
uh, my best, or like have they really given their best or not. And is there a shortage, like have I not led them well, have I not like exposed them to the best training for them to be able to do better, or is it just that they haven't tried? So like those are tricky conversations, because it's almost like, is it you or is it them?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I love listening and hearing that because it's that constant dance, isn't it, between being a leader and
yeah,
having a team around you, and you're only as good as your team, right?
right,
But
right,
it's then
right.
how do you bring in those immediate feedback loops so that
Hmm.
you are
Hmm.
constantly, it's giving that feedback with positive intent, but it's also
Yeah,
then kind of going, okay, I have these expectations, but how
yeah,
do I ensure that my expectations aren't beyond what the team is capable of? Like, because
right.
when you run your own business, own your own business, you do. And if you're someone who's always striving for, kind of to be better,
Yeah,
how do you ensure that people come along on the journey with you?
right, right,
Yeah,
right,
which is
right.
which is really interesting given what you're doing with Brain Bristle, and you
Mhm.
must see such diverse talent and skills within the children and the adolescents you're working with. Do you
Right.
see a broad like spectrum of the different, like you must see like from an autistic perspective, some of the kids they're so like beyond like smart.
Right.
And so how do you like in terms of applying that back to leadership, like
Uh-huh.
some of them are so talented and yet potentially misunderstood.
Right.
And so then how like do you ever look at that and kind of look at, who you're working with from a children perspective and then applying that back to leadership?
So I think be like for me, leadership is what you do in every moment, which is best for the people around you. So for me, like that is the biggest leadership principle that I will do in any situation what's best for the people around me. So if I've seen team members who've had really smart kids who just like know everything, who are done. Now, what would be like my big training to them and my big training for myself is, can I service this child? Can I service this school to get better than this? And if I can't, who would be the right person to access or reach? Because many times what we see is if everything is going well, if everybody is doing well, you just sit back and you're like, all right, like looks like everything's going well. This child's reading and this, fan's working and this teacher's teaching and the team's working. But how do you like really think about if somebody's doing so well, how do you push them further? So I think leadership is the ability to do the best by the people around you. And that's what I
Agreed.
train that's what I train my team on. That if you're done working with a kid, like, is this his teacher? Is it his parent? Is it somebody around them who you could help catch up? Or like is there something you still need to do?
Yeah, I love that. I love the curiosity in that as well and,
Right.
and the
Right.
exploration around it. What do you see in general is the biggest opportunity for leaders in the not-for-profit space in particular?
I think it is such an opportunistic space that we're in, especially in countries like India,
Yeah.
because we're still developing. People are getting educated, but we're so far behind in terms of being developed that anything that a nonprofit leader does each day is better than what they did the day before and is developing the country a little more. But I think like there's almost that we've for the last 80 100 years, India has just been battling poverty and
Yeah.
maternal deaths and healthcare crisis and so much that it's easy to get lethargic in this space. We see a lot of nonprofit leaders who are just like, yeah, somebody will fund it, we put this in money into something, and it's just like all really average work going on in many spaces. And I think our goal is, how do we really redefine excellence
Oh, I
every
love that.
single day?
Yeah, redefine, reshape, and
Yeah.
that probably takes me to my next question for you in terms of the future of belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of you're driving that inclusivity, especially in low income schools and bringing these children together and ensuring that they are part of a future that is, belonging and thriving and, getting the best education. Do you
Mm-hmm.
see that as I mean, there's obviously a huge opportunity in India, in, an emerging country like yours.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still think, though, there's a long way to go with regards to what you're doing in terms of the impact you're making? Or is it, like you say, each day it's constantly taking that one step to be better, to go forward?
I, you know, I'll be honest. I think it's each day we're all trying to learn from people across, like, because I've worked in so many other countries. I'm always
Yeah.
like, what would Professor Hickson would have done in a situation like this, or what would that school in Indonesia that was just so well funded and excellent do in a situation like this, right? So I'm always like trying to think about what would my leaders that I had worked with do, and how should I tackle a
Mm.
situation like this. So that's one. But I think for most of India, we see examples of excellence in the West and in other countries, but we don't know the pathway to it. And our education system is so archaic that they don't teach kids, like we might say we're teaching entrepreneurship, or we say we're teaching technology. But what are we teaching is sometimes a little muddled. So people see excellence, but they don't know how to get there.
Ah,
And I think like that's what, so even if they're taking a step, it's never as, or it's never getting close to what you see on TV or what you see in places. So it's just like, oh, whatever. So I think India has developed a lot in many ways, but we're still finding our paths to development. And in that, there's a lot of trial and error in a
So
good way.
it sounds like
Yeah.
you're like this pioneer, though. You're this emerging pioneer that is reshaping and taking people on the journey and reshaping the models and giving them the steps to get there, if you know what I mean. Like in terms
Yeah.
in terms of given all your experience from a global perspective, do you
Mhm.
feel like you were called back to India for a reason, like knowing that you've
I
worked all
think
over
so.
the world?
I think like your body just sometimes does things which is kind of like destiny. I read a lot of like Greek mythology and I read stuff like this. But I think it was just like I just got a really big job at a school in Hong Kong where I'd be like advising, inclusion across primary school. It would pay me a couple of $100,000. It was really exciting. And then I just like had this thought that maybe I should move to India and do something there. And I took a big pay cut and I took a big cut on my life because, Hong Kong's a lot more developed and a lot more thriving. And I just moved here. So I think like it was a calling from somewhere, destiny's calling to get me here. And now it's almost like response. Like even though there are times where I'm like, oh my God, it's so hot and it's so polluted and nothing works here and it's so frustrating and I have no money, but I think it's just like responsibility. You're like now you've got a family. Like you just like gotta do what you do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you talk about that because you've almost gone from one, not career, but if you like, but you've gone from like this material, kind of
Yeah.
wealth and everything else, and then you get this calling, and it's
Yeah.
back to filling your own cup, and the fulfillment of doing something that is heart-centered, soul-centered, mind, body, soul connected, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting in terms of the ability to adapt, but then you start to realize that what brings you that joy and what brings you that happiness. And like for me, very, very different, but from experiencing burnout and going from one, world I was in to now a different world.
Yeah.
And you make the changes, you make the sacrifices because you're pursuing something that
Yeah.
is like your mission, your purpose.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
it's you have your days where you're like, oh my God, what am I doing today? But
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
that there's a greater calling, calling you, it's destiny, it's calling
Uh-huh.
you to do it.
Right.
Do you ever get feel that you are being, or do you ever get told, why don't you just get a real job, or why don't you just go back into corporate world or anything
Right.
like
No,
that?
for sure. Yeah. 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 Constantly.
And how do
Yeah.
you handle that?
I think it's just like, you listen to whenever you're running an organization of your own, you just listen to all feedback from everywhere and then do what you do with it. So right from friends to family to ex-bosses, they all have like you should come back and join, or you should move out of the country and you'd earn six times of this and you could then like travel to this place for the summer and all of that. So you just listen to everything and you let thoughts simmer and then you make your decision that which levers do I need to push in my entrepreneurial journey to get to the places where these people see me getting to. So yeah, I think like all feedback is good feedback because it gives you food for thought. Even when my team messes up in some way or they do really well in some way, it's all like good feedback for me as a leader because it tells me what is going well but what is not going well.
You're so right. You're so right. You've
Yeah.
got such great
Yeah.
tips. Like you've given such great tips around embracing that creativity, having the ability to have, as an entrepreneur or just in general, like, making sure that you've got that creativity, filling your own cup, but then doing something from
Yeah.
a career that where you're following your passion and, and
Right.
then obviously the impact you're making with the children and adolescents who are in low income
Mhm.
schools with, autism.
Mhm.
What?
Mhm. Can I ask you a question, B?
Yeah.
What's the name Bee Formless? Like what got you to that name? I love that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're asking me a question. This is awesome.
Mhm.
So Be
Mhm.
Formless, so kind of similar to what you have just been talking about, and actually what we've been talking about pretty much this whole way is that I was I guess for me, I was a form in myself in terms of I had a career that I was, from an advertising comms background,
Hmm.
and I loved it, absolutely loved it, and I loved what I did. But essentially, I was scaling a business, and I was just working like a crazy woman, you know,
Yeah.
24/7. And then basically, bless you, back in 2022, I finished in the role I was in, and I'd scaled the
Mhm.
business to 20 plus million in revenue over an 11 and a half year period. I had 150 staff, and I burnt out. I was diagnosed with severe burnout. And so when I finished in the role I was finishing in, there was a restructure, and there was an opportunity for me to take a redundancy. And so I took it. And I think it's be careful what you wish for, because I think for
Yeah.
2 years prior, I'd been getting that calling as well of this isn't what, there's something more to be done in the world. You have a bigger opportunity. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But I wasn't listening. And so then I crashed and burned. And essentially, yeah, I took probably 6 to 8 months off. I went traveling around the world,
Hmm.
was exploring, and was always interested in flow state and how do you bring the best out in your teams, how to bring the best
Hmm.
out in yourself and business. And I'd been
Hmm.
practicing and testing it out a bit in COVID. Anyway, long
Hmm.
story short, I decided to start my own company. It'll be 2 years young this coming
Wow.
July.
Wow. That's
And
awesome.
formless is around being shapeless, like water. Like, when you pour a
Right.
glass
Right.
and
Right.
all
Right.
the water goes everywhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's literally going from one form of myself
I
that was
love that.
no longer viable or sustainable.
That's
And then
awesome.
I had to become formless. So I had to become shapeless, lose my whole identity, and, kind of just explore, get curious, be open-minded, embrace the unknown, similar to what you did, where you've come back to
Yeah.
India with
Yeah.
everyone telling you, what the hell are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
Had
Yeah.
similar conversations. I got a call today about a role, and I'm like, no, I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Right. 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 Right.
And
Right.
so formless is that, I guess, ability to then reshape and come into a new form, and a new form when you're thriving, and, but it's a continuous, you're
Mm-hmm.
continuously becoming formless and being formless, and you go into your new form, and then you can reshape or shape again.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how Bee Formless came about, the
Love
name.
that. That's beautiful. That's amazing.
Yeah, so I work with
That's
leaders, and
beautiful.
I work with businesses, and, inside out transformation, which is essentially, what happened to me, and lived experience. So, we've both got that,
Yeah.
similarity in terms of
Right.
the
Right. Right. Right.
entrepreneur, and, and I still get I sometimes get, and I don't know about you, I don't know if people are actually taking my business as serious as I am, in terms of this is my role now. This is what I'm
Yeah.
here to do. I'm here to
Yeah.
work with leaders and businesses and show them
Yeah.
there's another way,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's a better way. And yet, so that makes me want to pursue, well, doesn't make me like it's coming from within, but it's
Right. Right.
no, I'm here on this, and I will do, and I will get there.
Right.
Probably get the same sort of thing at times, like you said, when you're, saying, why don't you do this, or why don't you do that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
the journey of an entrepreneur is always, yeah, it's never ending, isn't it? Like, we
Yeah.
live and breathe what we do.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't
Yeah.
change it for anything.
Yeah, no, same. I wouldn't. Like, I mean, I just love I'm so glad for the years that I worked with organizations and I was told what to do and I had defined roles. But and I broke out of those roles a little bit. If I had to do A, B, C, D, I always like overachieved a little bit, which was good for the organization and for me as a person.
Mm.
But now I would never go back to that. I love this.
Yeah, and I can tell
Yeah,
it's obvious, and,
yeah,
it's funny. I've got one more question for you, but, it's funny. Someone saw me the other day, and they were like, "B, you look so whole. You look completely
right.
different." And I'm like,
Yeah,
hadn't seen me for a while, and
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
radiating this
yeah.
You look so illuminated, and I talk a lot about illuminating the soul of the
Uh,
leader or the business, and you just look
yeah,
like you've got this illumination about you, and that's
yeah,
essentially what
that's
this
it.
person was saying as well.
Right.
So, with my final question for you, because I know that
Mhm.
you've had a busy week and it's Monday, and Mondays is always the telltale
Yeah,
of the rest of your week's going to look
right, right,
like.
right.
What would be your biggest hope for the children that you're working with and the future of these children?
My hope for the children that we work is always like they should live lives even better than what I could have imagined for myself. They're really bright kids on the spectrum of autism, and I just hope that we can. And they're from low income families and across communities. And my hope is my team and I can just put in everything possible into these kids to just amaze their parents and their school systems and their cities and their countries, because these kids just have so much potential. It's
Mm.
just about us opening doors for them. So I just hope we keep opening the right doors for these kids who just look at us so longingly, like, what are you going to do for me today? And how am I going to study a little
So
better today?
beautiful.
So I just hope we open every possible door and window for these kids.
I know you will. You seem
Yeah,
like you're going to continue
I
to open all the
hope,
doors. How
I hope we do.
how do we find out more about you and Brain Bristle?
So I think because of the internet, I mean, I have a public page on Devangana, so I'm a writer. So lots of people who are writers and other people in the arts follow me there. Brain Bristle has his own page. We're also in LinkedIn. So yeah, it's I'm very easy to find.
Awesome. All right. Well, I look forward
Awesome.
to adding these where to find you in your notes.
Yes.
And is there anything from your arts and creative world or any books that you've got coming out anytime soon?
I do. I have my next book coming out this fall, which is going to take up a bunch of my days this summer. It's set in the Bombay of the 1980s, so it should be interesting for everyone. I write in English, so it should be easily accessible. I'm also scaling my organization, Brain Bristle, to more schools, more impact. So if anyone's interested in, volunteering, partnering, doing any of that, just like I'm always open to things like
I
this
love
or
it.
chat for
I love
doing
it.
that.
You're such a
So
collaborator. Well, thank you,
thank you.
Devangana, for having your
Thank
time
you,
today.
thank you,
I know
thank
how
you. This is so great. Thank
yeah,
you.
no, I've really appreciated it. And you have a lovely afternoon.
You too. Thank you for doing this. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good luck.